and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1050th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, Programs Associate here at the Rail, and today I have the huge pleasure and privilege of being your MC for a conversation featuring Massinissa Selmani and CJ Salapare. And now I'll introduce our guest and host for today. Massinissa Selmani constructs dreamlike scenes that mingle documentary images with fictional elements. Generating surreal interactions, the works revel in the absurdity of human behaviors. Selmani received a special mention at the 56th Venice Biennale and has participated in the 11th Dakar Biennial and the Sharjah Biennial 13, among others. He received the Art Collector Prize and the SAM Art Projects Prize for Contemporary Art. An extensive monograph covering the artist's work was published by Skira in 2023. Our host today, CJ Salapare, is a curatorial assistant at the Whitney Museum of American Art, where he's working on the exhibition Edges of Ailey. His research spans the fields of Philippine diaspora, art historical method, and performance studies. He's contributed essays and interviews for Artist Space, Bar Near, the Hammer Museum, the 2024 Venice Biennale, and the Whitney. He received MPhil degrees in art history and arts education from the University of Cambridge and a BA in art history from Williams College. CJ and Massinissa, thank you so much for being here, and I'll pass it over to you, CJ, to get us started.
Great, thank you, Eleanor. And thanks, Massinissa, for being in conversation. And thanks to everyone for showing up on a Monday afternoon, wherever you may be. So I'm thinking if we could start by just showing all of the install shots from the show. So this is Massinissa's first show in New York and in the States. And so I really want to begin from a bird's eye view, give people a feel of the show that's currently up at Jane Lombard. So my first question, Massinissa, is how did this show come about? Can you walk us through what's happening here, what's taking place?
Yes, first, thank you for hosting me. Yes, so the show, I started to work on it like almost a year ago. My practice is first about drawing and the experimentation of drawing and all what drawings allows. And for this show particularly, I wanted to come back to something which is at the origin of my work, which is the relation between comedy and tragedy, and with a sense of also interest for architecture, with something also that it is related to the question of violence in general, and how to diffuse this violence, how to think about different elements that speak about this violence. So the violence for me can be like elements of architecture, but also kind of signs of power, like the uniforms, the police, etc., but also the structure of the situation itself, themselves. And then there is, in the show, there is a couple of drawings and also 2 animations. The work of animation is something important in my work. I started doing that since I was a student. And my animations are often very short. It's often very short action, which is absurd. So maybe you can laugh at the beginning, but the loop turn it into something tragic. And there is often no beginning and no end. And it's in the same thing and process in all my drawings in general. So I also have another work of installation and more work of drawing in the space. This, we can show it maybe later in other contexts. So here is, like in few words, the context of the show.
Oh, I'm glad you've laid out this kind of matrix or this set of coordinates. You know, like thinking about, it seems like you're really drawing out a kind of affective field, right? Like you start out with these conditions of tragedy and comedy that I think are themselves artistic traditions that span way back when, right? But that are also things we feel on the everyday. I guess, and you're also pointing to architecture that's at once monumental, but also something that we encounter, on a daily. And so there's this toggling between the mundane and the monumental that feels kind of an important point of orientation here. Maybe the question I have is like, what are the spaces that you've been in or that you've encountered or that you've had to navigate that have been formative for you? I think if part of your work is about kind of placing or positioning people in unfamiliar, kind of surreal and absurd situations or coordinates, is that something that you've drawn on from prior experience? Is that something that is kind of part and parcel of the process for you?
I think all this is made with many layers of things, right? So I think the first thing is probably the childhood. I grew up in Algiers during the 90s. And so during the 90s in Algeria, it was the civil war. So I grew up in the context where even it was like the background was violent, I had the chance to laugh a lot. And it was a kind of daily exercise for many things. And one of the things that I like to explain about my work that probably gives very good start and good approach to my work is that during that period, a lot of people, when they buy a newspaper, one of the first gestures is to look at the cartoon. So to laugh first, and then go to the headlines with the violent content of what is happening around, and especially in the context of the civil war. So from that, I had the interest of the newspapers and press photography in particular, and also the use of humor in that context. So I started to collect newspapers, press clippings, and I started one day to take different elements from different images from the press and just put them together. But I was immediately attracted for images of like riots, violence, war, and everything. But I didn't want to have something really like just straight to the point. I wanted something with it has some kind of surrealist approach, because you put different things together. They don't have any relation between them at the beginning, and from that you create something new with a new context. So in this context I can put everything, because with drawing everything is possible. So I can draw whatever I want, and I put any element in any context that I want. So for the architecture, sometimes I took it from the press, so I can just took like a fragment, for example, but also sometimes it came directly from my sketches in my notebooks. So I draw a lot, and time to time I said, okay, this is interesting to use probably in drawing or in installation or something. My notebooks are kind of database for that also. I have a kind of daily exercise of drawing. Yeah, and also when you grow up, when you travel, when you see different works of other artists and you read, etc., there is other elements that that are additional to the work and gives more layers and more depth probably to the work. So yeah, the encounter of the Belgian surrealism, for example, was something important. With the work of Saul Steinberg also was really important. He's probably one of my favorite artists. So, and it's probably because like the New Yorker became for him a kind of a playground. He started doing cartoons, but the drawings at the end became almost conceptual. So here are some keys to the word. Maybe a last word. You were speaking about this idea that things can sound familiar. but you cannot really situate them. I do that in purpose because I think if I, for example, draw a place or a character that you recognize, I think that my drawings will collapse because it's not especially about one situation. It's about a context and a logic of something. So I like to use this example. Like when I draw a protester, for example, it's the same gesture everywhere, right? So when you put it in another context, so you recognize a kind of type of architecture, for example, wall or something, but you don't have any indication of the space of time. So you need to fill the gaps and also make your own interpretation. And also the last point, which is very important, it's there is also a playful part. Because there is a part where I just having fun, to be honest. Like it's not only about trying to say something. Just I draw things because I just like to draw them.
And I think that element of play is so foundational to your work. You know, like you use the term playground, and you can't unsee these situations that you've built. You know, like you're like, oh my gosh, this architecture does kind of evoke that sense of discovery. It places you in a totally different headspace of how to navigate or how to get lost, right? I think another layer that I want to kind of ask about is your background in computer science. Like, do you also see that inflecting or informing your work here? Like, I'm thinking about like there are several uses of the grid, your kind of interest in geometry. Also, I mean, you mentioned that your notebooks are a kind of database, right? Even picking up on the vocabulary of that feels maybe like a fulsome way of kind of adding another layer of complexity.
Yeah, maybe there is something because when I studied computer science in Algeria, I was supposed to write code for databases. And I think I loved that, but the attraction for drawing was more strong. And I prefer to draw rather than write code. Um, so yes, I like geometry a lot. I'm really attracted to that. When I was in high school, it was probably my favorite part in when I was a student also. Yeah, also I like probably things were very, because my drawings, even they look very light, there is a lot of white space, but I mean, the process is very long. Sometimes I can spend like 3 weeks to a month to do composition of drawing because you put layers, you put different elements, because usually I draw first in tracing paper, each character, then I use tape to place it in the paper, and then I move. And it's once again about this playful part that, and this is also sometimes generate something very interesting. You have some examples in the show. When you start the show, the two first drawings on the left, they looks like my preparatory drawings because they're drawings in tracing paper. Yeah, so I use this logic. So everything is really, yeah, everything has very structure behind.
And it's good that you bring up the tracing paper here, you know, because I think it speaks to the beginnings of a very kind of layered process for you, right? Like
Yeah.
what you get the source material, how you not only transform and transpose it onto another material, and what it might become, you know, what the kind of magical effect might be, right? It's almost like a kind of alchemy by way of drawing. So I'm wondering if we could start talking about another kind of related series here where you also use tracing paper,
Yeah.
Alterable series. Could you talk more or elaborate for the audience about what this entails?
Yes, Alterable series is, I think, probably is one of the most important series in my work. I started this series when I was a student, and I'm doing one, two or three by a year. So it's an ongoing project. And I think I would probably do that as long as I can. And the process is almost the same, and it's very simple. So I take pictures from newspaper. So I do first I alterate the image like physically. So I do one photocopy, another photocopy from the photocopy, etc. And then I use tracing paper. This one, for example, the one which is displayed now, I use probably 1 or 2 layers of tracing paper. So I just like take one element and move it a little bit with tracing paper and place it again on the top of the image. And then I do scan. Sometimes I keep the image exactly in the same scale, in the same size with the tracing paper on the top. And sometimes I can do a scan and can print it to make it in different scale. And it's also about for me, it's also about how images can be alterated and how also with just, because usually it's very, very simple gesture, like the minimum possible, just little thing, just to create a kind of glitch or kind of, yeah, to open little window in the image. And the process is the same. So every time the image is different. Usually it's black and white, but the last few ones, the last ones that I did last year, I used for the first time color, but it's very, very light touch of color. Yeah, so this is the context of the drawing, and once again, it started with this interest to press photography.
I mean, just having you lay that out speaks so kind of profoundly to the title of your show, right? Like the sense of the fissure, you know, that slight opening
Yeah,
and the mirage. There's such an interesting wordplay that's happening there vis-a-vis, I think, the quote unquote heaviness or the kind of authority of history, of
yeah,
document photography, of the things that we take as a certain type of fact, right? Um, I'm really curious, like, so for you, like like these changes that you make feel, I'm trying to find the right word here, where it's not minor, it's not inconsequential, but it's not like you're making a grand gesture, right? Even the photocopy, it's the same image, but there's a slight change that it undergoes.
yeah,
You know, for example, with the figures over there, they're raising, you know, like it would be their right hand. But when you
mhm,
to the left, there's almost like this effect of guilt, right? Of a kind of a different type of reading that takes place. Or even
yeah,
well, if you go to the next one where you have the different barricades, even the kind of that intimation of movement, of moving forward, or of being crouched in a different place, there's a different set of relations that happens. Like for you, what do you see when you make these slight transformations? What is it that comes to mind when you do make that alteration? Like, what do you feel?
Oh, I feel happy when I work, so this is important, no? No, I don't know. There is in this series, especially, there is really a playful part, but it's always about violence. Like this is, I'm obsessed with walls and fancies, and I realized that I draw that since the beginning. Sometimes it became as a motif, but sometimes it's really drawn as it is. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes it depends when I open. So I collect a lot of newspapers. It's not specifically one newspaper or one country. So every time I travel or my friends travel, I ask for newspapers. So the sources are different. And also what is interesting is that from a country to another, from newspaper to another, the place given to the press photography is absolutely not the same. For example, I live in France, so if you see newspapers like Le Monde or Libération for the people who knows this newspaper, or like New York Times, the place for press photography is very important. You have good pictures, they have photographers that go to cover events, etc. But you have all these other newspapers that they buy images from databases, and they just reframe the image, and they can put any caption that they like. There is, for example, there is one images that I found several times in France in different newspaper. It's just very simple picture of policemen near their car. They were probably speaking about something not important at all. But this same image, I found it like, for example, for a comment about speaking about justice, and sometimes the same image was reframed with another caption with more dramatic content. But it's exactly the same image, just the reframing. I mean, something. Yeah, and these little things make sense for me. So sometimes also the image that I use, sometimes I also play with that. I reframe them sometimes a little bit. And also the alteration is also to create, I like this grayscales and what the photocopy, the texture of photocopy gives. So it's also this graphic part, and it's the graphic vocabulary that I'm trying to build also.
Like your own kind of visual lexicon, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think it'd be good for us to go to one of like individual shots of the works that also include tracing paper. Like I'm thinking about, it's like the, it's called like silent balance. It's the wheel and then the, what is it? Like the tortoise or the turtle underneath. Just to give the audience a feel of what that looks like, you know, and what it does on the, it's not even a page, it's just like on the drawing itself.
Yeah. Yeah, for example, this one was supposed to be a preparatory drawings. And finally, I found it much better like this, because in my work in general, there is also this aim to create something really light. Lightness is really important in my work. And also, it's also about the economy in art, how to be able to work all the time, to don't be to be able to work in any context. So no question of production costs or all these questions. So, and it's challenge all the time, and it's the quality of the drawing. The quality of the drawing for me is the silence. So.
So it seems like, I mean, the title here feels a little bit apt, you know, like a kind of silent balancing of all of these different dimensions that you want to play, you know, like tapping into, let's say, like press photography, the cartoon, all of these graphic traditions, also maintaining a certain kind of resourcefulness or an economy of stroke or of form, but also, I think, trying to communicate maybe like a larger message, you know, a kind of metonym for something or a metaphor for whatever is transpiring in our own realities. Like, I mean, here there's so much, I feel like there's so much to plumb, you know, like there's literally a wheel that, and then like an animal that we so often associate with slowness. Like, how do you come up with these types of juxtapositions, Massinissa?
Yeah, for this one especially, honestly, I like to draw some animals, and I can't pronounce it in English. It's very hard for me. But the tortue, it's something that I really like to draw. And this drawing is typically an accident in the studio. I draw this wheel. I draw it for another drawing, so it was like in tracing paper for another drawing, and I really used it in that drawing. But it was like I think 5 years ago, and then I find another copy of it, and it was in the studio, and I draw that and just put them together, and it makes me laugh. And I said, yeah, it's a good reason to keep it. So I don't have any other like smart explanation or something, but it happened just like that. This like kind of accidents that happen in the studio, because the studio is also a place where you generate a lot of material and time to time, because you work a lot on something, you generate a lot of elements, and these elements sometimes they encounter each other and they make sense. And this is what happened, because it's came from the same place, the same vocabulary. Yeah.
And I think that sense of it brings another time frame or time scale into being or into the conversation. Like you're thinking about it, yes, in terms of the daily events that we all face, but also in terms of your own daily routine. Like when you draw a tire and then you put it away, it never fully disappears. It's something that can reappear at any moment as a latent form. I think like maybe what that, for me, like what that's speaking to is the sense of a kind of imagination or a kind of imaginary of images that aren't necessarily concrete, but that kind of
Yeah.
lock themselves into your brain. Like what is, you know, we can find other synonyms for that, a picture bank, a database, etc. But
Yeah.
but I think if we can go to another of the individual slides that's a bit more architectural, that shows these absurd situations. Like maybe one, it's the one with the watering, the man with the his foot in the watering can and he's hiding behind the corner. There's the microphones.
Yeah, the title is As You Look Around.
Like for you, like how, I mean,
Yeah,
what,
perfect.
great. So, you know, like those other scenes, it's like the forms are pretty, not self-explanatory, but are relatively simpler compared to these situations that you have, you know, these drawn forms. So beyond thinking about the how, I'm really thinking about the where and the when, you know, the kind of unique space-time coordinates, if we can even call them that, of these drawings. Like, and I think another thing that's really important, like I'm thinking about it when you spoke about these different, like, you know, having Getty images use the same, offer the same image to narrate different events in various newspapers. Like there's such a difference between presentation, narration, and contextualization that
Yes.
feels important here. Not only like within that frame, but also within your works. Can you flesh out those different layers? You know, like definitely interrelated, but I feel like they're operating at different levels or in different ways here. Like what is presented? How might you narrate what's happening here? And like, I guess, how do you decontextualize what we kind of might see, you know, or might suggest as a kind of action, you know, like in the title or in what the different men are doing?
Yes. For example, this one, there is two things, like the architecture, the characters came from newspapers. And I don't know if people can see it closely, but it's the two characters, it's a picture of an arrest. So someone being arrested by a policeman. So I had this situation, I put it in this architecture, and there is some recurrent element that I draw, like flags, wheels, the walls, the microphones, all the devices of recording. And they have, for me, it's like the flags, the stones, also the green fields. Sometimes that I draw, for me, they are related to maybe the question of, it depends on the drawing, the question of the nation, the question of nationalism sometimes, the question of the land, the question of, I don't know. And also, and for me, it's kind of the opposite of the individuals, because what we call the kind of nation, etc., it's something that involves many things that on globe. everything, and the individual, sometimes it's kind of hard to exist inside this. So yes, it's related to that, and also it's kind of way to try to create a kind of drama in the drawing, but this drama is totally impossible because you have this microphone pointed to the flags, and there is, how you say in English again, the thing on the foot of the guy.
The watering can.
Yeah, it's trying to, how to say it in English, like to put water to the microphone. So the microphone is kind of a tree in somehow. Yeah, this was like the idea, but it's my own interpretation. So maybe people, they have their own interpretation, but I'm not sure that they have like one single interpretation. But once again, what I like to play with is this question that you have the feeling that you recognize something, you know what is happening, but not exactly what and when, because the situation is suspended. There is no really element that to rely to, for example, to say, oh, maybe it's speaking about this situation in that place. And I do it in purpose. As I said in the beginning, for me, if I put like a place or something that you recognize, I think my drawings will collapse.
Yeah, I mean, like the short circuiting of meaning or of a kind of clean or seamless narrative is really important. Like you said the words, like it's hard to exist within a society, and I think it's so hard for your characters to exist in these situations. It's like
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
like how is this man gonna get his foot out of the can? You know what? Like where is the kind of, where do they turn to, right? Like what do they do? There's a sense of, I don't want to say not powerlessness, but I think like just an element of absurdity to it all that feels really important too, you know? And I think also these different elements that you bring in, you mentioned the flags, the microphones, you mentioned, what is it, like the rocks, etc., like the open-endedness of meaning or of metaphor, that they can mean so many different things simultaneously, also feels, I think, incredibly important. Like, how does that work vis-a-vis, like, is that something communicated through the drawn forms themselves? Is this through the use of kind of blank or empty space? Like, where do you think the hinge is for something, if we're to talk about it as a threshold of transformation? When does it become defamiliarized or more unfamiliar and perhaps more open nation, Massinissa? Like maybe we can turn to another drawing, like this one. Like, why is this man standing on the rhino? Why are trees growing atop? I don't even, like, enlarged pedestal or kind of, I don't know what to call it, this like protrusion in this landscape. Like, why is the plane only going up when supported by this pole? Like, what is this wall? All of these questions keep coming to mind without resolution.
Yeah, for this one, for example, is like having different situations happening at the same time, but they don't really yeah, I saw mini vignette. Yeah, that's right. Yes, exactly. It's like different stories in the same story. And also like the guy on the right, it's a kind of how to say it in English, in diversion. Someone speaks French here, in diversion, like what's the word? Yeah, anyway, just like to disturb your point of view, like maybe you're focusing somewhere, diversion. Okay, yeah, right, thank you. And then yes, so you don't know. For me, it's like, for this drawing, for example, I don't want people to focus on something especially. I want them to be a little bit lost. Shall I put to the right, to the middle? As you said, displaying what happened, why. And yeah, once again, it's the playful part. And also about the white space, what I used to say about this use of the white space for me is when I cut different characters from different press photography, so they came with their own context. When you put them together, you create a new one, and so then you avoid, which is the context of the original context, right? So it's also about this, what is the source of the images? What is behind these images? If you put it in another context. Maybe also we've used one reflection from one of my friends, also curator. Her name is Natasha Marie Lawrence. We're working together for a long-term project. And she used to say that my work is also about the structure of history. It's not about something linear. And I think she's right. So she's so brilliant. So I should trust her when she say that. So, so I think she's totally right. Yeah, there's probably something about this. As I told you, like I don't like things that they have a beginning and an end. I like suspended situations. The surrealists, for example, they say when you isolate an image, you make it eternal, and I really like this idea.
I've been thinking more about the structures of history, right, and how you rework or reimagine them. Like, what do you think is unfolding anew? Is it the way that we kind of come into history? Is it the way that we uncover it? Like, what is the change that's undergone with history for you as an artist, but also perhaps through your kind of own practice?
Yes, it's a good question because sometimes I mean, speaking about newspapers, so there is an attraction to the structures of the events. So history also. So I have kind of another part in my work that I like to describe it as drawing as a documentary form, which is a bit different in what is displayed now in the show at Jane Lombard Gallery. Time to time, I like to focus on something in long-term projects. For example, I'm working now on this kind of project, like to take a historical event. So for this is different. You have the real context, you have the historical event, what happened, etc. But what I try to do is to speak about this historical event only by using drawing and what I call drawn form. So no archives, no interviews, no, even I collect a lot of archives, how drawing can speak about this question. So, and also the failure, it's important. So when the drawings don't succeed to speak about it, it's also interesting for me. Like, for example, if you speak about an event where there is again a question of power, for example, how I can create a form with drawing that can make you think about this situation. So sometimes I use, for example, once again, it's about vocabulary that I'm trying to develop. Like, for example, the use of the rulers or instrument of measurements, for example. For me, it's a kind of representation of power, of rules, and then you play with that, adding drawing, putting something on the top, etc. I mean, for me, art is it's about putting things together and try to make sense from that, right? It's the first simple gesture, and the drawing has this this quality, I think.
And I think you so astutely pick up on this shared kind of condition of both drawing and history, the sense of ongoingness, right? So like, you know, for example, I think most pertinently to you, like a history of Algeria, like that's not something that ends at a certain type of date. There's no resolution
No.
chain of events. It's just a constant unfolding. Even the way you
Yes.
practice with drawing, you're like, I always have to be doing. Like there's a way where you yourself are documenting the very things that you're experiencing. All of it feels warped into one, you know? I guess like for
Yes.
you, can it be divided or is it all indivisible? Like, how do you kind of see yourself within all of this that you're kind of bringing to bear or bringing together?
I think I'm totally lost. This is why I draw, I think. No, for me, honestly, like I had some projects. My work is not totally, I mean, related to Algeria, but time to time, it's nice to be confronted to your own history. And for me, I use art to understand what I didn't get in school, for example. So there are, in the history of Algeria, for example, we're colonized by the French Empire and we're free in 1962. So when I was in school, it was just about how Algeria was, I mean, our revolution was strong, was crazy, was one of the most perfect. In the 70s, everyone come to Algeria. It was like the capital of all the decolonial movement, etc. But what about the individual inside all this history? Because it's all about our heroes, etc., and nothing about the people themselves. So I think this is why, for example, for me, the best approach of some events or some parts of the history of Algeria were through fiction and through books. Because through fiction, for me, it makes things more. It gives you more empathy to the character, to the context. And when you speak about the individuals, it's also a good way to speak about the context in general and kind of the global situation. Yeah, I don't know if you have another question about this.
Well, I mean, just it's like, it's really interesting where people often like ask artists to kind of clarify or to like their art making is the path toward a kind of illumination or revelation, right? That's when it gets complete through the process of making. But it seems like for you, it's just a way of kind of contouring or understanding the mysteries, right? Or like the things that are so absurd or unanswerable that you're just like, okay, like here I am, you know, like for example, like this, like I'm like
Yeah,
it doesn't have to mean anything, you know, like
yeah, but in the same time, I think I'm always between two things. In the same time, I'm not, especially in drawings, I'm not trying to say something specific, but you have something that I extract from real life, even it's in newspaper, for example. Um, so yeah, and also it's about, there is like a French word that I like a lot. It's about l'insondable. L'insondable means the unspeakable. Yeah, is it correct, my pronunciation? So you get it, right? So yes, all the things that you cannot say with words or with so drawings is here to solve these questions for me. So there is also, it's like to open a window to something. I think it's important for me. Yeah.
Yeah, to find the fault lines, right? Or to find the fissures. I guess here it's like, it's interesting where you mentioned the unspeakable, but you've also had this recent turn toward wordplay or toward an inclusion of words. So this is a a great example here, but you also have others that hinge upon adverbs or kind of prepositions, things that help to situate us in a sentence, right? Like what prompted that for you?
Yeah, the words started. I never expected that I would use words in my work, but I started to think about it. I was in residency in Italy, and I met Iranian American poet. His name is Kaveh Akbar, who wrote some poems in my monograph. And it was really, I mean, a very nice encounter. I really admire his poems, the way that he likes. And it's funny because he draws a lot before while he is writing his poems, and I write a lot while I'm drawing. So the connection between us was very good, and like his poems sometimes for me is kind of the if my drawings, some of my drawings will be a poem, it will be probably one of his poems. And we spoke a lot about these questions, and he makes me more comfortable to use words because our exchange was, and he has a real attraction to visual art. He has a real good sense of visual art. So this was the like kind of starting point. And after when I wanted to use words, so I come back again to newspapers, and then I look up to the captions of newspapers. Newspapers is always who, when, and where, right? So I start to use adverbs of time, of like the word where, for example. I use it in installation. I use the word when, into, also in French, of course. And now I'm trying to go beyond, I mean, more further. Like my next show will open with a sentence, which is something like I never did. So I don't know how it will be, but in the context of the show, I find it really interesting. So even the word or the title, because the titles are very important in some works, and sometimes in the for the shows also, I spend a lot of time to find the title. And I like titles that have kind of contradiction, that opens a window, but in the same time, this window looks quite difficult to open, but it opens something. So yeah, there is kind of contradiction. Sometimes the titles are quite absurd. Yeah.
Yeah, like in the say, it's like an intertextual approach that you have. Like all of these words like then or into, etc., are missing what precedes and what follows. So you're also like the words are equally as lost as your protagonist, as like your other forms here. Like, and you can't help but laugh at so many of these. I think if we could go through a couple more of the slides just to get a sense of, I think the humor that I think is so integral to your practice, Massinissa.
Yeah, really important.
So that sense of play, it's like a way of keeping things buoyant, right? Never kind of bogging it down with a kind of heaviness. Like where is humor for you, or what is humor for you in terms of making, in terms of experiencing these works?
Yeah, when we started, I spoke about the cartoons, and I realized that like when I was a teenager, I grew up in the context that I told you about in the beginning, but I realized that humor was probably my first exercise of thinking, like a philosophical exercise, because at that time I wasn't reading books or anything, just having this, and this humor, especially in a tragic situation, makes you, I mean, you have to kind of make a step back to understand the situation. And it gives you, you know, this distance that allow you to understand what is happening or to support. Or it's for me also kind of way of resistance. I mean, every time, look, in every country, in every place where the situation is very tough, people, they used to laugh a lot because it's probably, yeah, otherwise you became crazy. Yeah, and it's about also the lightness once again, and also yes, there is also tradition in Algerian literature. For example, one part of the Algerian literature where you have this logic, you have always crazy situation when you laugh a lot, but the background is very violent. So I think it's a kind of a state of mind also that you develop and you try to share with people.
Yeah, and it's like even the sense of staging that you have, right? It brings into to the fore certain terms like the foreground, the background, etc. Right? What gets kind of the mise en scène, the mise en abîme.
Yeah.
And there's something I find really fruitful about that. Like even if the violence isn't so explicitly drawn or kind of narrated, it's still ever present, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and also there is this question of kind of strategies of display in the drawing itself, like how you use the space of the paper to go use an architecture to go to the deepness of the space, to use what is out the frame to open different directions in the drawing. And yes, and as I told you, the compositions are very long. Sometimes I can spend, like, for example, I have a drawing in the studio. I started like the composition more than 2 years ago, but there is still something not working. So it's hanged in my studio since 2 years, but it's by chance, it's not always like that, but time to time it happens. It takes time. Yes, I think for me, it's always like the first thing that I do is I have a beginning of something, so I put everything on the paper. No, just directly, it's literal. And then I start to remove. It's often about I'm spending more time to remove than adding. And the end, I remove until the step that I feel like if I remove something, the drawing will collapse also. It's always to find a very, very, very thin balance with this white space, which is there like enough things, but not too much. And also, I think it's also a way of thinking of art. For me, I like artworks that are not so loud, so it's probably something I try to keep also in my own work. Like, I don't like to say to people what they have to think. I mean, everyone is smart, so uh, it's a way to play with their memory, with their own background, their own interpretation, especially with drawings, because with drawing you can draw anything. You can fly, you can do whatever you want. So
And I think just in the interest of time, Massinissa, like I definitely want to go through the image of the Marcel Duchamp Prize where people can see it turn from drawing to sculpture and installation. And then I also want you to talk about your ongoing series, A Thousand Villages. So if we can just move to those slides, Eleanor, that'd be great.
yeah. Yeah, this is, for example, where I draw an architecture in a drawing, and then because the characters that I draw they are often confronted to these absurd architectures, and sometimes I do the opposite. Like I try to put the viewers in the same position as the characters that I draw. So I produce some element of architecture. So here you have just a portion of the show, but it gives you a first idea. For example, the shadow of this little rod on the right, it's not real shadow, it's a fake shadow. So I also try to play with perception, and also I mix different works together to create a kind of new work. Because for me, I don't have any hierarchy between my works. Everything is connected. So I can reuse a work that I did a long time ago to mix it with a new one. And for the ongoing project, yes, I'm working on that project titled 1000 Villages. Just few words to give the context. So I said Algeria was free in 62. And in the 70s, the Algerian government wanted to build 1000 socialist villages. It was to promote architecture, agriculture, because after the independence, so the country was like almost, I mean, the colonization was a history of displacement of people and also a history of stolen lands. So it was kind of symbolic, also gesture to give back the stolen lands to Algerians, and also a lot of farmers were very poor, and this socialist villages is to create like villages and together to create kind of a good context to the people to develop the Algerian socialism, agriculture, etc. But this utopia collapsed because they finally end up building around 500 and the project collapsed. And they never said officially that the project stopped. So I was really intrigued about that. When I spoke to my father, and my father, I said, do you remember of that project? He said, of course, it was huge. It was on TV every day, a newspaper every day, and you cannot miss it. And from a day to another, they stopped speaking about it. And my father said, "Oh, it's funny that you're speaking about it. I totally forgot it. It's kind of a rumor." And the word rumor like makes sense for me. So I was trying to look how a project in that scale, because it's really 1000 villages in all the country. So how a project in that scale was totally forgotten from the memory of Algeria. So we're trying to explore this memory. So I did the first project in Venice in 2015. And a few years ago, I was contacted by this creator I was speaking about, Natasha Marie Lawrence, to continue the project. So we did another step in Algiers in last December. So you have one installation shot from the exhibition. And we're doing a next step in Andex Foundation in Sweden in September. So even in this project, for example, at the moment, I don't have a kind of final shape because I want to keep it open. And the form of because we're meeting people like in Algiers, we met a lot of sociologists, people, they were just, they have like 20 years at that time, so they were involved in Algerian revolution, socialism, etc. So it was very interesting to hear them. And also we're going in few days, I'm going to Algeria to go to visit one of these old villages and to speak with the people. I don't know what I will do with the images that I will bring with me, but yeah, you have few words about that. Otherwise, I will stop here. Otherwise, it's very long to explain.
We'll just have to see what happens. I feel like this is a fitting end, just to see where you go.
Yeah,
We'll keep it going. But I just want to thank you, Massinissa, for such an illuminating.
yeah, my pleasure.
I mean, like you all see like the play and the whimsy and just the lightness of form in his drawing. So hopefully you like it too.
Thank you.
That was so, so wonderful, CJ and Massinissa. Thank you. That was really such a joy. There's so much to think about with this work and your practice, Massinissa. I'm so grateful we've been able to hear from you about it. We've got a couple questions from the audience now. And our first question will be from GE. GE, I'll allow you to unmute here.
Thank you very much, Eleanor. Thank you, CJ, and thank you, Massinissa. As I look at your work, I think of like all the lives and all the people I will never know and will never be, but they're everywhere. And I get the sense that this is all our world is, in a sort of conveyance of surrealism. Is there anything to this?
Like to surrealism?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like when I was student, I went to visit Museum of Photography of Charleroi in Belgium, and I saw for the first time the photographies of a Belgian surrealist called Paul Nouget, and it became one of the biggest encounters in my path as an artist. So, and then I discovered more the Belgian surrealism. Yeah, I really like for example, the Belgian surrealism. They like also William Burroughs did, like the technique of cut-ups, like using exactly words from different books and to create another novel or books, etc. And yeah, this is what I'm using when I use newspapers. So of course there is this connection between what I'm doing and the way that some surrealists think about their art.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, GE. And I would like to ask a question, Massinissa. I noticed so much in the drawings at the Jane Lombard exhibition, the shadows and the explorations there. And I know we just started to talk about that actually, but I'm wondering about that. Obviously, we heard your inspiration from this photographer, but I'm wondering how your exploration of shadows maybe is it influenced by photography, or can you talk a bit more about whether you think about photography and light in your work?
Yes, the shadow is very something important, especially in the drawings, because when I started to do this process using different things from newspapers, the first time when I started to do that, I really kept the real shadows of each element. So when you put them together, of course, there is something wrong because they are going in different directions. And then from then I started to play with that. Sometimes I decide to keep them. Sometimes I draw another one. Sometimes I extend the shadow to suggest that there is something on the frame, for example. And also, and for me, like the elements exist because it's surround them. So for example, with the shadow, you don't need to draw something. You can just suggest it with the shadow. So it's also kind of a strategy when I draw and when I build this situation to use it in the same time as a graphic element. And also kind of strategy of mise en scène also.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. And I think that is our last question for the Q&A today. Such a luminous dialogue again. Thank you both so much. And now I am so happy to pass it back over to CJ. We're going to conclude with the reading today.
Great. So Eleanor, if we could just share the screen to the work La Place et le Lieu. It's the one of the like the statue, the balance, like that torso-less statue, and then the bird flying, the animation, because that corresponds with the title of the poem. Great. So this is by Kaveh Akbar, La Place et le Lieu. That something beautiful could choose you. That alone. Suspense. Wings too. wings to suspend what's between wings, not to be elsewhere, but to remain more radically. Shadow and stone, soft core of the earth, and the clouds not yet torn into rain.
Beautiful.
So beautiful. Thank you so much, CJ, for sharing that. And yeah, I'll just plug one more time Massinissa's monograph, which has more writing by this poet. So thank you so much for sharing that. And thanks also to Isabel from Jane Lombard Gallery for supporting us as we prepared for today's conversation. A huge thanks again, of course, to CJ and Massinissa for your brilliant dialogue. And we'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring the NSE and supporting our archive, which you can explore on the Rails YouTube channel. And this conversation will be posted there very soon. The Rail has been independent and free for 23 years. A donation directly supports our writers, production staff, and operations, and please consider supporting us through the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow, join us as we revisit NSC number 519, an ode to Willem de Kooning on the occasion of Willem de Kooning and Italy, currently on view at Gallery dell'Accademia. Thank you all so much for tuning in today and joining us. And you can now turn on your microphone and say hello and goodbye as you leave.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci,
Thank you.
Massinissa
Thank
and
Merci
CJ.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes,
Bye.
Thank you.
Très bien.
Thank you,
Thank
Messina.
you.
Thank
So
you.
much. That was amazing.
Take care,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you,
Congratulations.
CJ.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you,
brilliant.
Massinissa.
Jane Lombard.
Messina, thank you
Thanks
so
so much.
much.
So much.
Thank you, CJ.
Oh,
Thank
Go
you
see
for
the
the
show.
reading.
It's your last week to see the show.
Yes,
yeah.
congratulations. Can't wait to see the show.